He called her a liability, not to her face. He said it in the hallway outside her supervisor's office, loud enough that she could hear it through the door. A 26-year-old home health aide with no college degree and no business-making decisions that could expose this agency to lawsuit. That's what Douglas Mercer said about Anaya Briggs on the morning of February 11th, before she'd even had a chance to take off her coat. She had been working for Sunrise Home Care for 3 years by then. 3 years of 6 a.m. shifts of driving her 2009 Civic through neighborhoods the GPS sometimes refused to recognize, of learning which clients took their blood pressure medication with orange juice and which ones needed it crushed into applesauce. She knew her clients the way you know the people you love, not from a file, not from a checklist, but from the 10,000 small things that don't fit into any report. She knew that Mr. Elton Vance, age 81, always turned the television to the Weather Channel when he was anxious. She knew that he kept a photograph of his late wife, Gloria, tucked inside his Bible, and that on bad days he'd hold it while she changed his sheets. She knew that when he stopped eating, it didn't mean he wasn't hungry. It meant something was wrong that he didn't have the words for anymore. Douglas Mercer had never met Elton Vance. He managed the agency's risk portfolio from a glass-walled office on the 3rd floor of a building in downtown Cincinnati, and his job was to make sure Sunrise Home Care never ended up on the wrong side of a lawsuit. In 3 years, Anaya had never once been called to that office. She was punctual. She was careful. She followed the protocols. She documented everything. She had no idea why she was there until he told her. It had started 4 days earlier on a Sunday. Anaya didn't work Sundays. That was her day. The one morning she let herself sleep past 6. The one day she drove to her mother's house in Norwood and sat at the kitchen table and ate eggs, and didn't think about anyone else's needs for a few hours. But she'd been driving home from her mother's that evening, coming down Vine Street just after 7 p.m., when she passed the corner of Vine and Hollister and saw something that made her foot come off the gas. An old man, standing at the bus stop in a thin cardigan, no coat, no hat. The temperature had dropped to 22 degrees. The kind of cold that gets into your ears, your knuckles, your chest. He was standing very still with his arms crossed over himself, and something about the way he was standing, the absolute motionlessness of it, the rigid, locked-in posture of a man trying not to let his body know how cold it was, made the back of Anaya's neck go tight. She pulled over. She got out of the car and walked to him, and when she got close enough she recognized him. It was Elton Vance. He was supposed to be at home. His daughter in Columbus had called the agency that morning to confirm the weekend check-in. His aide, a woman named Rosa who covered Sundays, had logged a visit at 2 p.m. But here he was, standing at a bus stop 6 blocks from his apartment, in a cardigan, at 7 in the evening in February. "Mr. Vance," she said. He looked at her. His eyes were glassy and distant, the way they got when his dementia was pulling him somewhere she couldn't follow. "I'm waiting for the 42, he said. "Gloria's making pot roast." Gloria had been dead for 11 years. Anaya didn't correct him. She just said, "The 42's running late tonight. Why don't you sit in my car where it's warm and we'll wait together?" He nodded. He let her take his arm. He got in the car. She sat with him for a few minutes, turning the heat up, watching the color come back to his hands. Then she drove him home. She had a key, all the aides did, for emergencies. She got him inside, got his coat on him properly, checked his temperature, made sure the stove was off and the doors were locked. She called the after-hours line to log the incident. She sat with him until he fell asleep in his recliner with the Weather Channel on, and then she let herself out. She thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. 3 days later, Elton Vance's nephew called the agency. His name was Patrick Mercer. Not related to Douglas, just the same surname, which Anaya would later think of as a kind of dark joke. Patrick Mercer was 53 years old, and he was Elton Vance's only living male relative, which he referenced in the opening sentence of his complaint as though it were a title. He was also, according to the agency's intake coordinator, very loud. He said that Anaya Briggs had entered his uncle's home without authorization, that she had transported a vulnerable adult in her personal vehicle without agency approval, that she had made a medical assessment, checking his temperature, deciding he was safe to be left, without the credentials to do so, that she had, in short, acted outside her scope and exposed both the agency and his uncle to unquantifiable risk. He said he was considering legal action. What Patrick Mercer did not say, but what became clear over the following days, was that he had recently filed paperwork to become his uncle's legal guardian. That guardianship, once granted, would give him control over Elton Vance's finances, including the Norwood Avenue house that Elton had owned outright since 1987, assessed at just over $300,000, and that Anaya's involvement, her visit, her log, the documented incident that would now sit permanently in his uncle's care file, complicated certain things. Anaya didn't know any of this when she was called to the third-floor office on February 11th. She sat across from Douglas Mercer and listened to him read the complaint in a flat, careful voice, and she felt the specific hollow cold of someone who has done everything right and is being told it was wrong. "You understand," Douglas Mercer said, "that transporting a client in a personal vehicle is a clear violation of agency policy." "I understand that's in the handbook," Anaya said. "I also understand that the temperature was 22 degrees and he was standing outside without a coat. That's not the point. I think that's exactly the point." He looked at her the way certain people look at you when you've said something that surprised them, not because it was smart, but because they hadn't expected resistance. Then he looked back at the complaint. "We're placing you on administrative leave while we complete the review," he said. "Pending the outcome, your position may be at risk." She drove home. She sat in the parking lot of her apartment building for a long time. She did not cry, which surprised her. What she felt wasn't grief exactly. It was more like the feeling of standing on ice and hearing something crack. Not under her feet, not yet, but somewhere nearby. The review took 8 days. During those 8 days, Anaya did not sleep well. She applied for 2 other jobs, a hospital orderly position in Loveland, a medical transport driver in Blue Ash, and heard nothing back. She called her mother every evening and said she was fine. She went to the grocery store and bought things she didn't cook. She watched a lot of television without remembering anything she'd watched. She thought about Elton Vance standing at that bus stop, holding himself very still against the cold. She thought about what would have happened if she'd driven past. On the 4th day, she received a call from a woman named Geraldine Ossie. Geraldine was a retired nurse who lived in Elton Vance's building, 4th floor, had known him for 12 years. She had heard about the complaint through the building's informal network of people who paid attention to things, and she wanted Anaya to know that she had seen her bring Mr. Vance home that Sunday night. She had seen it from the lobby. She had thought at the time that it was the kindest thing she'd witnessed in a long while. "I don't know if it helps," Geraldine said, "but I know what I saw." "It helps," Anaya said. On the 6th day, she got a call from Rosa, the Sunday aide. Rosa was quiet on the phone at first, and then she said she needed to tell Anaya something. She said that when she had visited Mr. Vance at 2 p.m. that Sunday, he'd been confused, agitated. He'd kept asking about the bus. She had logged the visit as routine because she hadn't wanted to file an incident report. Filing reports meant paperwork, and paperwork meant scrutiny, and she was already on a verbal warning for something unrelated. She said she was sorry. She said she was going to call the agency's compliance line and correct the record. "You don't have to do that," Anaya said. "Yes, I do," Rosa said. On the 8th day, Anaya was called back to the 3rd-floor office. Douglas Mercer was there. So was the agency's HR director, a woman named Beverly Cho, and sitting in the corner very quietly was a man Anaya didn't recognize. Late 60s, Navy suit, the kind of stillness that takes a long time to develop. Douglas Mercer began to speak. He said the review had been completed. He said the agency had received additional information relevant to the complaint, he said. The door opened. 3 people walked in. Anaya had never met them before, but she had heard about them. Not about these 3 specifically, but about people like them, in the way you hear about things that feel too good to be true until they are suddenly, undeniably true, and standing in a room with you. The first was Dr. Constance Obi, a geriatric specialist at Christ Hospital, who had treated Elton Vance the previous fall. She had driven 40 minutes to be here. She was wearing scrubs under her coat, and she had not bothered to apologize for being underdressed. The second was Father Ambrose Quirk, the pastor of the church 3 blocks from Elton's apartment, where Elton had attended services every Sunday for 22 years, until his dementia made it too hard. Father Quirk was 67, soft-spoken, and carried himself with the quiet authority of a man who has presided over a lot of difficult conversations. The third was a woman named Halston Webb. Halston was 34, an attorney, and she was Patrick Mercer's second cousin. She had grown up watching Patrick Mercer operate. The way he circled around family members when they got old, the way he showed up with paperwork and charm, and left with things that had belonged to other people. She had been waiting for someone to give her a reason to say something on the record. Anaya's case was that reason. Beverly Cho looked at Douglas Mercer. Douglas Mercer looked at the man in the Navy suit, who had not moved or spoken this entire time, and who Anaya now understood was probably an attorney for the agency. Father Quirk cleared his throat gently and said, "I'd like to speak first, if that's all right." Nobody said it wasn't. He spoke for 4 minutes. He talked about Elton Vance, not as a case file or a liability or a client, but as a man. He talked about the years Elton had spent volunteering at the church's food pantry, even after his diagnosis. He talked about the Sunday afternoon, 3 months ago, when Elton had shown up at the rectory door confused and cold, and how Father Quirk had called the agency's after-hours line and been put on hold for 11 minutes before he gave up and walked Elton home himself. He said he had not filed a complaint about that. He said he was filing one now. Dr. Obi went next. She talked about the medical realities of dementia and sub-freezing temperatures. She talked about hypothermia risk in elderly patients with impaired judgment. She pulled a printed article from the pocket of her coat, the kind of article that gets printed and carried when you want to make sure the room cannot look away, and she laid it on the table in front of Douglas Mercer. She said that what Anaya Briggs had done on February 7th was not a policy violation. It was an emergency response. She said that in her medical opinion, if Anaya had not stopped her car that evening, Elton Vance would likely have been found the following morning in a state requiring hospitalization, if he was found at all. Douglas Mercer opened his mouth. She said, "I'm not finished." She talked for 3 more minutes. Then Halston Webb opened a folder she had been holding on her lap. She placed a set of documents on the table. Court filings, she explained, related to Patrick Mercer's guardianship petition. She walked the room through what was in them, in the precise, unhurried language of someone who has read the same documents 20 times and is making sure everyone else understands them as well as she does. She explained that the complaint Patrick Mercer had filed against Anaya was filed 4 days after Patrick Mercer's attorney sent a letter to a financial advisor questioning the current valuation of Elton Vance's Norwood Avenue property. She said she was not asserting that these 2 things were connected. She said she was simply noting their proximity in time. The man in the Navy suit leaned forward and said something quietly to Douglas Mercer. Douglas Mercer's face did something complicated. Beverly Cho said she needed a few minutes to confer with the team. They left the room. Anaya sat in the chair she'd been in for the past 40 minutes and looked at the 3 people who had walked through that door, and for a moment she couldn't find words. Father Quirk gave her a small nod. Dr. Obi was reading something on her phone. Halston Webb was recapping her pen with the methodical calm of someone who had done what she came to do. "How did you know?" Anaya asked. Not a specific question, she wasn't sure yet what she was asking. Just how. Halston looked up. "Geraldine Osei called me," she said. "We go to the same church. She called me the day after she called you." Father Quirk said, "And Geraldine called me." Dr. Obi didn't look up from her phone. "And Geraldine's daughter is one of my nurses," she said. So, when Beverly Cho and Douglas Mercer came back, Douglas Mercer looked like a man who had recently been told something he didn't want to hear and had decided to be professional about it. Beverly Cho set a piece of paper on the table. The complaint filed by Patrick Mercer was being dismissed. Anaya's leave was being rescinded, effective immediately. The agency was also, Beverly Cho added in a careful voice, initiating a formal review of its after-hours escalation protocols, specifically regarding the 11-minute hold time logged by Father Quirk in November. Douglas Mercer said he hoped Anaya understood that the agency had only been trying to act responsibly. Anaya looked at him for a moment. "I understand that," she said. "I hope you understand that acting responsibly and acting carefully aren't the same thing." He didn't answer. She picked up her bag, and she thanked the 3 people who had come for her, and then she walked out of the 3rd-floor office and down the stairs. And when she pushed through the lobby door into the February air, she stopped and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, just breathing. The following week, a letter arrived at Sunrise Home Care from an attorney representing Patrick Mercer. It was not about Anaya. It was about his guardianship petition, which had been complicated, significantly, irreversibly complicated, by the documentation that Halston Webb had filed with the probate court 3 days after the meeting. The letter was 4 pages long and, as far as Anaya ever heard, went nowhere. Elton Vance remained in his apartment on Norwood Avenue. The agency assigned an additional weekend check-in. Rosa, having corrected her incident log, was given a performance improvement plan that was fair and specific and did not result in her termination. Geraldine Ossie, for her part, took it upon herself to check on Elton every Sunday evening. Not officially, not because anyone asked her to, but because she lived on the 4th floor and she had a few minutes, and she knew what it meant to be someone who noticed things. Anaya went back to work on a Tuesday morning. She drove her 2009 Civic through neighborhoods the GPS sometimes didn't recognize. She took off her coat. She checked her schedule. Elton Vance was her second visit of the day. When she knocked on his door, he opened it in his robe and looked at her with the gentle, slightly uncertain expression he sometimes had in the mornings. The expression of a man standing in 2 times at once, unsure which one was real. Then something in his face settled. "Gloria's pot roast," he said quietly, almost to himself, and then, "No, that's not right, you're Anaya." "I'm Anaya," she said. He nodded. He stepped back to let her in. The Weather Channel was on. His Bible was on the side table, the photograph of Gloria tucked inside it where it always was. The apartment smelled like instant coffee and something faintly sweet, the hand lotion she'd brought him last month. Lavender and chamomile, because he'd mentioned once that Gloria used to wear something that smelled like a garden. She hung up her coat. She washed her hands. She started his breakfast. Outside, Cincinnati was 26 degrees and still. The kind of still that comes after a long cold spell. Not peaceful, exactly, but quiet in the way that things are quiet when the worst has passed. There are people in this world who get called a liability because they did the right thing. Because they stopped the car. Because they used the key. Because they sat in someone's recliner at 9 o'clock on a Sunday night until they were sure that person was safe, and then they drove home alone and didn't tell anyone. Think about the home health aide who has been in your family's life through the hardest years. The bus driver who noticed your grandmother at the wrong stop. The orderly who remembered that your father hated the lights left on. Think about them. Drop their name in the comments. Let the rest of us know they existed.